Bob will be calling tonight's Red Sox Yankees game on MLB Network, as well as both games of a doubleheader in the Bronx Saturday on Yes Network, filling in for Michael Kay. Bob, good to have you back. How are you?
Hi, Dan. How you doing?
I'm doing okay. Does baseball want to get rid of fighting?
I don't know if they want to get rid of all fighting or all conflict. Yeah, more or less. But what they really want to get rid of is intentionally throwing above anyone's shoulders. And there shouldn't be any disagreement about that. No old school code or anything like that should apply. Absolutely unacceptable. And what happened a few nights ago didn't start a few nights ago. There's a long history, as you know, between the Pirates and the Reds. And the Reds have reason to believe that this wasn't accidental, that it's purposeful, that it's gone on for a while, and that's what set David Bell off. This didn't happen in isolation. And maybe because this was so extreme and it went viral and because the suspensions are more than what you usually get coming out of an isolated brawl, maybe this will get people's attention. Because this idea, look, move somebody off the plate, yeah, I guess. Hit somebody in the thigh or in the backside, yeah, I guess. Can pitches get away? Yeah, I guess. And sometimes guys get upset when they're hit by a slow curveball, and clearly that's not a matter of intent. But there are situations where it's very clear what's going on, and it's only a matter of happenstance that somebody doesn't get seriously hurt. And that's what set David Bell and the Reds off.
Yeah, just trying to figure this out, and you know, we're of an age where we understand where you pitch inside. You know, hey, that inside part of the plate is as much mine as it is yours. I get all of those things. It's when you're throwing a baseball, and most of these guys throwing at least 95 miles an hour, and when you start to go up higher on the ladder here, and you go head hunting, I mean, I can't imagine this commissioner is sitting there going, hey, it's part of the game or an unwritten rule here. But I don't know if you can put out these suspensions and say, all right, that should fend these guys off who want to do this. We're really going to make you pay. I don't know how you send the message where you don't have somebody really taking somebody's life into their own hands.
Well, there could be a flat-out, unequivocal statement coming from the commissioner's office. Yeah, there are lots of things that were the way the game was always played that don't exist anymore. Collisions at home plate until very recently were part of how the game was played, and then common sense prevailed. And your point is correct. It was always a terrible thing to intentionally throw above the shoulders, but you didn't have so many guys coming in there pumping high-octane gas the way you do now, so that increases the danger.
The computerized strike zone, it's mislabeled with the robo strike zone. I've had Clayton Kershaw on the show. He's not for it. Don Mattingly was on the show yesterday. He is for it. Where do you stand on computerized strike zone?
Everything is so quantifiable now from so many different angles that I guess it's inevitable. But when the human element is completely removed, look, you want it to correct egregiously incorrect calls. You don't want something like what happened. Pardon me, like what happened to the Cardinals and poor Don Denkinger in 1985, and might have turned a World Series. The umpires don't want that, and nobody wants that. But if everything is quantified down to the last micromillimeter, it just feels to me, and maybe this is just generational, it just feels to me as if some of the humanity has been bled out of the game.
I would like to see it. I'd like to see it used for the All-Star game next year and just ease it in, let the players talk, mic them up. The umpire can be mic'd up as well. Let everybody in on the experiment, and let's just see how it feels, because part of me wants to see what a real strike zone is, Bob, because I don't know. I don't know anymore.
Well, nobody knows exactly, and when you see the strike zone box or whatever they call it on any given telecast, that may be helpful, but I don't think it's absolutely definitive. Are you getting a full three-dimensional look at it? I'm not so sure you are. And then there's the question of a guy's stance. What is his strike zone in his stance?
Yeah, I know.
You know, people alter their stance by a little. We're talking about a half an inch of correction. You think a guy's stance doesn't change more than half an inch from pitch to pitch sometimes?
Did you ever want to be an umpire for a day?
You know what? I umpired a couple of softball games, like maybe 40 years ago?
Yeah.
And they were softball games. They were slow-pitch softball games. I did it as a favor to a friend. And this is like a beer league. And this guy is yelling at me. He's yelling at me. And it actually couldn't have been 40 years ago. It had to be closer to 30, because then at least in some quarters people knew who I was. And I'm wearing a baseball cap, and I come out there and blah, blah. And now the guy is just reaming me out for a couple of innings. And then he walks off the mound. He does a double take. He goes, "Oh, Bob, I'm sorry." My thing is, well, don't abuse the next civilian who happens to be behind the plate. So that disabused me of any notion that I wanted to be an umpire. Talk to Brent Musburger about it, though. Wasn't he an umpire in the Pioneer League or something?
I think he was.
Yeah.
Like in Montana? Does that sound right? Yeah.
Yeah.
We're talking to Bob Costas, the Hall of Famer. He will be calling Red Sox Yankees. That'll be on MLB Network tonight, and then he's in the Bronx over the weekend. Doubleheader filling in for Michael Kay. Where are we with this rivalry?
I don't think it's quite as intense as it has been at various times. In the 70s, today is the 40th anniversary of the death of Thurman Munson. You think about Thurman Munson tangling with the Red Sox and Carlton Fisk and Greg Nettles. In the 70s, Bucky Dent's home run, the epic 78 race. And then right around the turn of the century, this time, when A-Rod and Jason Varitek and Pedro Martinez and Don Zimmer and coming back from down 3-0 in 2004 and Aaron Boone's homer off Wakefield the year before that. I don't think it's quite as intense now. And last year, the Red Sox ran away from the Yankees, so it wasn't tooth and nail to the end. And this year, the same thing seems to be happening in reverse. And an odd bit of scheduling, the last game they play during the regular season is September 9th. The last 5 years prior to this, they always met the last few games of the season, which set up some drama if the race was at all close. So I think this year a lot of that stuff is working against it.
And I'm going to bring in two sports here, baseball and football, and two positions, pitcher and running back, because I don't know if we're getting to the point where it might be harder to define what a great, albeit Hall of Fame pitcher is, and the same with the running back, because it feels like the rules are changing a little bit because of how we use pitchers and how we use running backs. Which one do you think is a little bit harder to define what makes a Hall of Fame pitcher, starting pitcher, and a Hall of Fame running back?
Well, I don't go with the idea that you can just compare by percentage. Somebody pitched 5 good innings, and so that's a great outing, or 6 good innings, that's a great outing. It might be good, but it's not great. You still value the Verlanders and the Scherzers who can go deep into a game, and I would assume that Hall of Fame voters would take that into account rather than just looking at, okay, here's the ERA, here's the whip, but the guy only went 5 or 6 innings on average as opposed to the guy who went deep into the game. When it comes to football, obviously with so much emphasis on the passing game, and now with a 16-game season as compared to historically way back when 12 and more recently 14, and maybe they go to 18. What does a 1,000-yard season mean? And how effective is a running back as a receiver? That's much more of a deal. And they used to throw screen passes to Jim Brown, who could do everything, but that wasn't the primary idea. They were handing him the football. That's not as much the case now as it used to be because it's so pass-heavy.
We've talked about expanding the netting. We've talked to people about this, whether it's players, whether it's management, whether it's stars, and then I keep hearing different things as to why we don't have netting for all ballparks. And then the commissioner said, "Look, it's up to the individual teams." Doesn't the commissioner have the power vested in him to be able to say, "I want this netting up, and I want it up in the next 2 weeks"?
Yeah, under the broad heading, which Bud Selig was always invoking, of the best interests of the game. Yeah, it ought to go all the way down to the foul pole, or if you've got an odd configuration like Fenway Park where you got the sidewall jutting out, then it goes all the way to that point, all the way to the point where you could reasonably be concerned that a line drive could endanger somebody. I really just think it's a no-brainer to do that, and we don't need to wait until there's a fatality at the ballpark to get the message. It's like, wait a minute, we'll put a stop sign at this intersection after there's a 12-car pileup. Well, if you can see it coming, if you can see the possibility of it, let's stop it before it happens.
Yeah, I don't buy into, the commissioner's leaving it up to the teams. The commissioner did, I guess, invoke his power and say we're going to put the netting from the backstop over to the dugouts. So he already did that. So I understand if you're buying premium tickets and you think that this is going to somehow infringe upon your viewing pattern, your habits, enjoying the game. I get that. I just think you'll get to the new normal where you don't even notice that net. And the other part of that was, I thought, Bob, if you lowered that netting in batting practice and maybe you have interaction with the players, you get a baseball, all of that. Game starts, nets come up, and then that's it. But, people think they're losing the intimacy of the game. And I said, you won't lose that. After a while, you won't even notice it, but, it's fallen on deaf ears.
Yeah, I think you're right about that after a while people will get used to it, and this is entirely unscientific, but I haven't heard any great hue and cry from people who are sitting up close but peering through the netting. Maybe it's slightly different or disorienting at the beginning, but I don't think we've got an insurrection on our hands. And just as you mentioned that pitching up above the shoulders is more dangerous now because so many people are approaching triple digits in velocity, there's another factor when it comes to people in danger, and that is you watch any game or you're sitting in the ballpark and all around you, people are on their cell phones. They're distracted, so that increases the danger.
What's the coolest piece of memorabilia you have?
The coolest piece of memorabilia that I have.
Sports or other?
I know. I have baseballs signed by Babe Ruth, not inscribed to me. I was not on this planet when Babe took his leave, but I have a Babe Ruth inscribed baseball. And then I have baseballs inscribed to me from Joe DiMaggio, Willie Mays, Hank Aaron, and Mickey Mantle.
That's cool.
Yeah.
But you used to interview a lot of musicians. Did you ever collect anything from musicians that you interviewed?
Come to think of it, no. Springsteen, Paul Simon, Smokey Robinson.
Tom Petty?
Carole King. No, I never interviewed Tom Petty.
Oh, you didn't?
Glenn Fry. Bob Seger, did I say Paul McCartney?
Oh.
I guess I could have gotten all of them. I got none of them.
Would you rather interview, who's more forthcoming, an athlete or a musician?
It's a generalization. I'd say the musician, because if they sit down to talk to you or me, they're prepared, I guess, to be forthcoming. They're not interviewed on a regular basis as much as athletes are. But then there's always exceptions. I've always used this example. Some people are really good in talking about their craft. They talk insightfully rather than in generalities. Among baseball players, Ted Williams was the gold standard of that. He could explain hitting to you. He and Tony Gwynn could explain hitting to you better than Stan Musial could explain hitting to you, even though he was close to virtually as good a hitter. Jerry Seinfeld could deconstruct a joke or a monologue just as well as Ted Williams could deconstruct hitting. Tom Seaver could do the same thing with pitching. So I guess it varies from person to person.
Yeah, and then you have someone like Springsteen who has, he has that ability to kind of tell you what encompasses this or how it happened or, those kind of things, where you can also talk to another musician who is, even Bob De Niro. I don't think he explains his craft. I don't think he cares to. But then Tom Hanks could probably sit down and say, all right, this is what I'm thinking when I'm doing Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood here.
Well, now, okay, since you mentioned the names you mentioned, just conjures up an image from a few years ago. I'm at the White House, which is not a regular thing for me. When I don't just drop in unbidden, but I'm at the White House for the Presidential Medal of Freedom ceremony. It's toward the end of Barack Obama's second term, and Vin Scully is receiving the Presidential Medal of Freedom. And he and his wife, Sandy, were kind enough to invite me and Jill to come to the ceremony. So we're hanging around before it begins, and everywhere you look, Diana Ross, Ellen DeGeneres, Michael Jordan, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Tom Hanks is there, Robert De Niro is there, and Springsteen is receiving a Presidential Medal of Freedom. Okay, so now picture this. I'm talking to Hanks, but my back is to what's happening in the corner of the room, but Hanks can see it over my shoulder. De Niro, meanwhile, true to your characterization, is just kind of standing there monosyllabically looking at the floor. So I'm chatting with Hanks about I forget what, and he says, "Hey, look at that. What do you suppose this conversation is like?" And I turn around, and alone, two guys in the corner, Vin Scully talking to Bruce Springsteen. So Hank says, "What do you think that conversation is like?" And I venture a guess. "You know, Bruce, I loved Greetings from Asbury Park, but you really hit it out of the park with Darkness on the Edge of Town."
That's good stuff there.
Imagine that. Scully and Springsteen, two great artists in their own right.
Oh, that's good. Hey, great to catch up with you. Have fun this weekend. And MLB tonight, Red Sox Yankees, and then on the Yes Network, filling in for Michael K. this weekend. Good to talk, Bob. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Dan. Take care.
Bob Costas, Hall of Famer.
For more Dan Patrick Show, tune into Audience Channel 239 on DirecTV. Stream for free on BR Live or download the Dan Patrick Show app.